Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're turning our attention to something that, well, touches almost everyone: age diversity in the workplace. As people live longer, work longer, our teams are becoming more and more multi-generational. And that brings some fascinating dynamics, both big opportunities and, let's be honest, some real challenges for employers globally. Our source material for this exploration is a really comprehensive survey. Quite impressive, actually. It was conducted by AARP's Living, Learning, and Earning Longer Collaborative, which is actually a partnership between AARP, the OECD, and the World Economic Forum. So, three heavy hitters looking at global trends. They surveyed 6,000 employers across 36 countries, giving us this fantastic global snapshot. Our mission in this deep dive, it's basically to unpack what employers say they think about age diversity. Then compare that to what their formal policies and practices actually look like, and try to figure out what this tension reveals about, the changing world of work, especially with all the curveballs from recent events like the pandemic. Okay, let's unpack this survey.
Okay, so diving right in. What's immediately striking, I think, is the high level of recognized value. Employers globally, they aren't shy about saying they see the benefit. A vast majority, we're talking 83% of business leaders surveyed across these 36 countries, they agreed. They agreed that having multi-generational workforces is key to their company's growth and long-term success.
Wow, 83%. That's not a fringe opinion at all, is it? That's pretty mainstream thinking right there. It really emphasizes that leaders get the potential, or at least say they do.
Exactly.
Joanne Jenkins, the CEO of AARP, she talks about this in the source material. She frames this whole reality, people living and working longer, not as a problem, but as a great opportunity. An opportunity to sort of reimagine how careers and learning unfold across a lifetime for everyone involved.
Absolutely. And she backs that up. She points to research that consistently shows these age-diverse teams, well, they aren't just good for morale, they positively impact engagement, productivity, and importantly, the bottom line. So it seems the business case is pretty clear to a huge percentage of global leaders. However, she does voice a concern that even with this recognition, the economic turbulence and uncertainty from the pandemic, it could unfortunately make existing age biases worse, fuel ageism.
And that brings us to a really critical point this survey highlights: the gap, right, between this recognized value and the actual concrete actions companies are taking. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Despite knowing the benefits, a significant number of these same companies, they just do not include age in their formal diversity and inclusion policies.
That's the surprising disconnect, isn't it? The survey found that 53% of the employers surveyed over half explicitly stated that age is not included in their formal D&I policies or strategies.
Right. So they'll tell you age diversity is important for success, but it's not actually written into the official playbook for how they approach diversity. What does that gap tell us?
Well, it reveals a tension, doesn't it, between the values they state and the practices they actually embed. The source material points out that, look, the understanding of diversity and inclusion is thankfully evolving. It's moving beyond just race and gender. But as part of that evolution, age must become a formal component of the policies, the programs, the whole underlying philosophy. It's just not enough for it to be a nice idea floating around. It needs to be integrated, into the organizational structure to really influence behavior and outcomes.
Yeah, you can really see this tension playing out in some specific policies they found. For instance, the survey found that nearly 4 in 10 global employers, they still operate with a mandatory retirement age.
Which, if you're trying to leverage experience and skills, that feels quite counterintuitive, doesn't it? Especially given that 83% figure we just talked about. The survey breaks down where this is most common. It's prevalent in government and public administration, and also pretty high in sectors like energy, telecommunications, and utilities. The source mentions the U.S. context, too, noting that while federal law generally prohibits mandatory retirement since, the 80s, there are still key occupational exceptions, so it's not universal even there.
Okay, so we have this picture forming. High recognition value, definitely, but then the significant formal policy gap, evidenced by things like mandatory retirement still being pretty common practice in some areas. But the survey also looked at what employers are perhaps open to doing, even if it's not always mandated by formal policy yet.
Right. There's definitely a stated willingness for certain age-friendly practices, and the numbers here are quite positive, actually. 70% of employers favor taking steps to promote unbiased recruitment processes, trying to remove age bias from hiring.
That's encouraging. And looking forward.
74% said they would be willing to provide training and lifelong learning opportunities, specifically for older employees. And 68% indicated they would purposefully design mixed-age teams, to better leverage the different perspectives and skills that come with varied age groups.
So it shows that while the big picture D&I policies might be lagging, there's a practical inclination, maybe, towards actions that support age diversity, even if the formal framework isn't fully built out yet.
Precisely. There's an openness there, at least in principle.
Now, we haven't talked about the context here. This survey was largely done during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? That massive upheaval.
Yeah, the pandemic certainly threw a wrench in traditional ways of working, didn't it? And the survey captured some of that impact. Over half of 54% of employers reported that they increased or provided more flexible work arrangements, including teleworking, directly because of the pandemic.
Right. And what's particularly fascinating here is how the pandemic specifically challenged one of the most persistent and, frankly, inaccurate stereotypes about older workers.
Ah, yes. The technophobe stereotype.
Exactly. The source notes that the stereotype of older workers as technophobes was proven wrong and counterproductive. When that big shift to remote work happened, workers across all ages, including older workers, they showed they could adapt. They became adept at teleworking, basically out of necessity.
It really exposed that limiting belief for what it was, didn't it? It highlighted that adaptability, that willingness to learn new tech. It just isn't tied to age in the way some employers might have assumed.
Such a crucial point.
Yeah, and it connects directly back to the bigger picture that the collaborative sponsoring this research, AARP, OECD, WEF, is trying to paint, which is that age diversity isn't just a nice to have or, some compliance issue you tick a box for. It's a genuine competitive advantage in the marketplace. That's the core message of the Living, Learning, and Earning Longer Collaborative. They exist to demonstrate this very point. Exactly. So the survey findings showing this high recognition of value, this demonstrated adaptability, even in a crisis like the pandemic, and this willingness towards certain inclusive practices, it all supports the idea. The idea that harnessing the full potential of a multi-generational workforce is actually a strategic move for companies. Good for business.
Right. So pulling all of this together then, what does this survey fundamentally tell us? If it feels like it reveals a really interesting landscape, where the widespread understanding among global business leaders about the benefits of age diversity, well, it's high. They see the potential for growth, for innovation, success.
Yes, yeah. Despite that clear vision of value, there's this significant institutional lag. It's quite stark. Over half of these same companies haven't formalized age within their diversity and inclusion policies. That's a big number. And as we said, outdated practices like mandatory retirement still persist in many areas. It's really this tension, isn't it, between knowing it's important and actually embedding it into the organizational DNA that really stands out from this research.
Right. It's like the potential is recognized, absolutely. The willingness for specific actions like flexible work and training seems to be there, at least aspirationally for many. And the pandemic even helped debunk some of those outdated myths about adaptability.
Yeah.
But the formal structures, the policies, they haven't universally caught up to fully leverage that potential. There's a disconnect.
Yeah. And maybe it prompts you, listening, to think about your own experience, whether you're in a workplace or just observing trends. Does this reflect what you see? Is age truly considered a dimension of diversity alongside others in your organization's conversations and policies? Are opportunities for learning and growth genuinely age inclusive? Or does it sometimes feel like an afterthought?
So this deep dive into the AARP survey, it leaves us with a pretty important question for you to consider, doesn't it? If employers know the value of age diversity, right, and the pandemic proved that workers of all ages are adaptable, they're capable of embracing flexible work, what needs to fundamentally shift within organizations beyond just recognizing the value or having this sort of informal willingness step? What needs to shift to truly build workplaces where everyone, regardless of age, can learn, contribute, and thrive for as long as they choose to earn? What's that next concrete step?